welcome each of you to the center today to hear a talk by Ady Barkan as part of our year-long critical mass series. I do want to give a special thanks to the English department for their generous co-sponsorship of this event, and also to extend an especial welcome to Rachel King for coming today, and also to Willow. Welcome to the world. Willow is all of 8 days, and you can never start them too early. So we're just delighted to see you all here. In developing the Critical Mass series, one of our key interests was in understanding progressive social change, the conditions under which it is instigated, the practices of organizing for change, the change makers themselves, and the alchemy of their leadership. As a citizen, social activist, and now author, Ady Barkan has done more than just about anyone in this country to give voice to the need for an equitable system of healthcare coverage. A graduate of Columbia College and Yale Law School, Barkan grew up with great privilege, which he has leveraged to serve those who have none. After Yale, he secured a coveted clerkship on the U.S. District Court in New York, about which he said, quote, "If I was going to benefit from my privilege and the family connections that helped me land the job, I hope to do both what was right under the law and at the same time make a lasting change for the better in the lives of so many New Yorkers." And he did change the lives of millions of Black and brown New Yorkers through his work with Judge Scheibelin on the landmark decision that put an end to the New York Police Department's stop and frisk program, which violated people's constitutional rights in an egregious way. While Barkan was clerking, the Occupy Wall Street movement was coalescing in nearby Zuccotti Park. Witnessing the activities in the encampment further catalyzed his passion for social justice. Rather than accept an offer to work in a civil rights law firm, he took a position with a new organization called the Center for Popular Democracy. As he described his decision to work on the front lines of progressive activism, quote, "Arguing about public policy, organizing protests, convincing a reporter that my cause was worthy of front-page coverage, these were the activities that got my blood pumping." In 2016, shortly after the birth of his first child, Barkan was diagnosed with ALS. As you will learn, the diagnosis introduced a challenge into his life that only strengthened his resolve to continue fighting for progressive social transformation. At the Center for Popular Democracy, Barkan developed the FedUp program, the Local Progress Network, and Be a Hero. The latter campaign was born when Barkan confronted Jeff Flake over the GOP tax bill that threatened to disrupt his health coverage, imploring Flake to, quote, "be an American hero and vote against the tax cuts." The exchange was captured on video and drew widespread national attention. In 2018, Barkan was listed as among the 50 most influential American Jews by the American News Media Organization, The Forward. In April 2019, Barkan testified before the United States House Committee on Rules to support Medicare for All. During the July 2019 debate, Elizabeth Warren mentioned Barkan's struggle as an example of the inadequacies of private insurance. And over the past year, 6 of the presidential candidates met with Barkan to discuss health care. And the videos, already watched by tens and tens of thousands of people, are available online in the short film Uncovered: Healthcare Conversations with Ady Barkan. Just 2 days ago, Barkan announced his support of Elizabeth Warren, which is no small endorsement coming from someone who Politico called, quote, "the most powerful activist in America." We are so fortunate to have Ady Barkan here today to discuss his life, his work, and his new memoir, Eyes to the Wind, a memoir of love and death, hope and resistance. Please help me welcome Ady Barkan.
Thanks very much, Susan, for inviting me today, and for that very thoughtful introduction. And thanks to all of you for coming. The memoir that I recently published is about my career as an activist and my struggle with ALS. Today, in keeping with the theme of the IHC series of events on critical mass, I will read 4 excerpts from the book that focus on assemblage, demonstration, and activism. We find ourselves today in a disturbing and dangerous political moment. Despite the incredible and unprecedented wealth of the United States, and despite the fact that the American people have more formal education than ever before, our democracy seems unstable and imperiled. Our government is led by deceitful, hateful, corrupt kleptocrats, and every day this week we are witnessing on vivid display the battle over what kind of a society we will live in. Will we hold on to the largely fact-based rule of law or slide ever closer to autocracy? The stakes of this battle are heightened dramatically because it is taking place at the dawn of a terrifying era of climate crisis. Our failure to recapture control of our democracy quickly here in the United States will have unprecedented consequences for human beings all over the world, for many generations. So the theme of this IHC series could not be more critical, or more massive. What will it take for us to retake our democracy? I hope that my readings today can contribute to the crucial effort to think about and answer this question. I'm happy to take questions afterwards, and I would also welcome any comments or reactions. It takes me a while to type out my answers, so I appreciate your patience. So this first excerpt is from Chapter 2, which flashes back to my time in college and law school. In the spring of my senior year at Columbia University, having been accepted into law school and bored with my studies, I began following my friend Simeon to the evening meetings of a radical student group called Students for Environmental and Economic Justice. For a couple of years they had been unsuccessfully trying to convince the administration of our wealthy, liberal university to ensure that the workers who made the university branded apparel in the sweatshops of Southeast Asia were paid a living wage and had safe working conditions. The university had already adopted policies requiring reasonable labor standards, but those standards were being ignored. So, in coordination with activists at other schools, we were trying to establish effective enforcement mechanisms. The students of SEEJ had made polite requests of the administration, written op-eds in the school paper, and tried various other gentle pressure tactics. But the university had a well-developed playbook for dealing with such annoyances: make sympathetic noises in private, promise to consider the issue, stall and delay, and wait until the handful of committed student leaders graduate or get distracted with other pursuits. Graduation was indeed approaching and we weren't quite sure what to do. After I recounted our predicament to my father one evening, he nonchalantly suggested that we occupy the administration building to get our point across. I took the recommendation back to the group. Over the course of a middle-of-the-night strategy session, we debated the merits of the idea. Some of the other students, particularly the women, were worried about the consequences of occupying the Low Memorial Library, the administration's headquarters, which had been the site of the famous 1968 uprising, when students occupied buildings to protest the university's connection to the Vietnam War and its relationship with the black community in Harlem. So, budding law student that I was, I walked the group through a reading of the university's disciplinary policies. They had good reason to be worried. Our planned infraction seemed to subject us to suspension or perhaps expulsion. But I cavalierly dismissed their concerns and assured them baselessly that the administration would never impose such a harsh penalty. I think we need to break up into gender caucuses, Davida said. She was a fierce and principled activist, and Simeon's girlfriend of 18 months. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I suddenly found myself in the hallway with Sim and a couple other dudes. Why did we get kicked out? I asked him aggressively. I think they just wanted some time to consider these issues calmly, he said. I was flabbergasted by the notion that I had prevented such calm consideration, and when Davida came out a few minutes later to invite us back in, one of the other alpha males and I petulantly told her that we needed a few more minutes to ourselves. I was still processing the novel idea that gender could play a role in the dynamics of group decision-making and that maybe I shouldn't treat the conversation like a debate tournament. Sim and Davida calmly walked our group through more discussion, and by about midnight we had a critical mass of women and men who were ready to take action. A day or two later, about 15 of us gathered on the sunny steps leading up to Low Library and marched into the lobby with our hand-painted banners and a few hundred flyers. In 2 hours the university was going to host one of its highest profile events of the year, A panel discussion featuring Paul Krugman, Joseph Stiglitz, and a couple other famous economists about globalization and inequality. It was the perfect place to highlight the ways in which Colombia was profiting off of exploitation in poor countries. We expected a confrontation with campus security upon arrival. But after we plopped down on the floor, nothing happened. It took about half an hour before a security guard calmly walked over and asked us how we were doing. About 30 minutes before the event began, an administrator told us we were welcome to stay there and hand out our flyers to all of the event attendees, but he asked that we clear a path so people could enter safely. We counted this as a win. 2 hours later, with the event over and the building ready to shut down, the university provost came by and asked us to go home. "The president and I will meet with you tomorrow," he said, "but only if you leave now. You can always come back again if you are not happy." We hadn't planned properly and had no food on hand. Rather than spend an unpleasant night on the floor, we decided to go back to our dorm rooms and prepare for the negotiations. The next day, we returned to Low Library and were escorted to a conference room on the second floor where the university president and provost sat with 20 of us around a big table. President Ballinger recapitulated our argument to us, appearing to be rehearsing the lines he would use with his trustees and other stakeholders. Columbia had made a commitment to ensure that its apparel was not manufactured in sweatshops, but that policy was being ignored by the university's licensees. Therefore, Columbia needed to join the enforcement program for which we students were campaigning. I was eager to declare victory and accept the draft statement that Ballinger handed out. Sim, more careful than I was, insisted that a few more details be included. We left the meeting beaming, surprised that our activism had been so successful. It was in this brief springtime campaign that I had my first real confrontation with power and saw how fragile it could sometimes be, how tigers are sometimes made of paper and jaws are sometimes made of glass. I also started to learn something about myself, that I had a knack for creative campaign tactics and for moving people into direct action. It would be years before I learned how to be a good listener to other people's words and to their sentiments, but I never forgot Davida's intervention. This is an excerpt from later in the book, covering the first year of the resistance to Trump. All around the country, activists trained by Jen and others like her were turning themselves into bird doggers, hounding politicians at town halls and other public places and sharing videos of their encounters with local news and social media. In July, their hard work had paid off and Trump care had gone down to an unlikely defeat. But now, in early December, it looked like the K Street lobbyists had successfully circled the wagons around the entire Republican Party and were about to score a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut windfall at the expense of the 99% of us. I told Jen I was ready to enlist in her campaign, and she told me she was planning a day of action on December 5th. "Come to DC," she said, "and let's go after some vulnerable Republicans." Speaker Paul Ryan enjoyed a 23-seat majority in the House, so if Democrats stayed united in opposition, he could afford to lose some but not too many of his members. Our strategy was to target the Republicans in swing districts who were facing serious challenges in the midterm elections that were 11 months away. Many of these were from suburban districts in California, Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey that Hillary Clinton had won and that would actually see their taxes go up under the Republican plan. We decided that I would help target Orange County's Darrell Issa, a two-time convicted carjacker who had profited nicely when his business burned down only weeks after he had boosted his fire insurance by 400%. He was now the wealthiest member of Congress. I bought my plane ticket and asked my father and brother to join me in DC for the day. It was going to be an important first for me. In over 15 years of activism, I had never engaged in civil disobedience. It was embarrassing, frankly, like being a film critic who had never watched a Fellini movie, or a chef who had never poached an egg. On the chilly morning of December 5th, about 200 of us gathered in a public park a mile south of the Capitol, where Jen and two other organizers split us up into groups and gave us marching orders. We hopped on buses for a short drive and then calmly filed through security at one of the House office buildings. We then began paying visits to Republican members of Congress, occupying the hallways, using the human mic to tell personal stories about how the tax scam would make our lives more difficult and dangerous. I walked through the hallway slowly, leaning on my cane and holding my father's hand. My voice was already getting softer and slower, so I saved my breath and let other people do the mic checking. At one early stop, I pointed out to my father a hijabi Palestinian-American woman who was being taken away in handcuffs. "That's Linda Sarsour," I said, pointing out one of the co-chairs of the Women's March, an unapologetic Brooklynite who had helped forge Communities United for Police Reform. "She is probably the most prominent Muslim activist in the country." By mid-afternoon, our numbers had dwindled to about 25 people. The rest had either already been arrested or had gone home. I was slated to be our final arrestee. So, after walking about 3 miles through the various halls and passageways, I found myself standing in front of Mrs. office, mic checking with a small company of comrades. My 6'4", 22-year-old brother, Mookie, gave me all the amplification I needed, bellowing out my comments over the heads of everyone else. My father stood 15 feet back, nervous about how the cops might treat me but grateful to be part of the action. Next to me stood our field commander, Jennifer Flynn Walker, my fed-up partner Sean Sebastian, one of my longest-serving CPD co-workers, Julia Peter, and an old ally from my Access to Medicine days, the Yale Law School professor Amy Kapczynski. Lip streaming it all was MoveOn.org's Washington director, Ben Wickler, a pal with whom I had shared many strategic goal sessions over the years. The police were very patient with us, letting me and Jen speak for 15 minutes before our chanting and banging on his office door became too much for them to tolerate. They gave us 3 warnings, during which everyone who didn't want to be arrested was directed down the hallway. And then, one by one, my comrades were placed in plastic handcuffs and escorted to the elevators. The police had a harder time knowing what to do with me, because without a free hand to hold my cane, I wouldn't be able to walk. After consulting with his supervisor, my arresting officer simply walked beside me. Ben's video showed me wobbling down the hallway like an al dente linguine. "Show me what democracy looks like," shouted the chant leader. "This is what democracy looks like," replied our supporters. As I passed Ben and his camera, I tried an advanced move, holding my cane up victoriously without breaking stride, hoping that I wouldn't pay for the image with a painful fall. I was put in a paddy wagon along with the other practitioners of civil disobedience and driven to a vehicle repair garage in the back of a police station that had been repurposed to process mass arrests. The mood inside was jubilant. We had come from all over the country to resist our government's greed and racism, and we basked in the warmth of righteous solidarity. About 2 hours later, I paid a $50 fine and was released onto the street, where my father was waiting along with a small welcoming committee. We walked just one short block back to the Capitol Skyline Hotel, which Jen Flynn had cleverly made our base of operations. Outside the hotel, I stood and spoke to Megan Anderson, whom I had met earlier that day. She had traveled from Cincinnati to be there, an effort all the more impressive because she was almost completely paralyzed below the neck from spinal muscular atrophy, a motor neuron disease related to ALS. We talked about how moving the day had been. I finally allowed myself to get emotional, to acknowledge the tragedy that infused my activism that day. "There is a higher purpose," Megan said. "I think you will see that there is a reason you are here today." The spirituality of her comment was foreign to me, and I bristled at the idea that there was some purpose of intentionality behind my ALS, but it reminded me of my MDEX comment a year earlier that I would make meaning out of my disease. Megan and I shared some tears, and then I went inside to eat and rest. The next day I was flying home to Santa Barbara, with a transfer in Phoenix. I did not know that it would be the most consequential flight of my life. This next scene takes place on that flight, after I learned that Senator Jeff Flake, a Republican from Arizona, was on the plane. Pushing Flake on his vote seemed worthwhile because he was one of the only Republicans who had expressed serious concerns about the tax bill. In order to defeat it, we needed to find 3 Republican no votes. He had been giving noble speeches recently about American democracy and good governance and had decried the opaque and rushed process by which the Republican leadership had authored the legislation. Could I convince him to make his vote match his rhetoric? Could I marshal all of my policy expertise and my emotional personal story to sway this hardline conservative deficit hawk into voting with the Democrats? In high school I had been a champion debater and an award-winning thespian. But this was no weekend tournament. Millions of Americans would lose their health insurance and thousands would die if this bill became law. I sat quietly and laid out in my mind all of the different arguments that might appeal to him. 30 minutes later, after the drinks cart had passed, the senator walked down the aisle and stopped at my row. Liz began to film on her phone, holding the mic as far as she could into our conversation to try to overcome the loud jet engine background noise. I began our conversation as I usually do when I'm talking to a powerful person who can give me what I want, by sucking up. I told Flake that we all admire his bravery in criticizing Trump and the secretive Senate bill writing process. Then I summarized for him my personal story and asked him why he would put my health care at risk for the benefit of millionaires and billionaires. Because the tax cut would dramatically increase the federal deficit, it was going to trigger enormous automatic cuts to Medicare and other crucial programs. These cuts would be allocated by a White House official who had repeatedly expressed his disdain for Medicare disability funding. This bill, I told Flake, would put at risk my access to a ventilator and the other medical care that I would need if I wanted to stay alive to watch Carl learn to read or shoot a basketball. He tried to assuage my fears by pointing out that Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan had promised to waive these automatic pay-go cuts. I laid out the many times that those 2 men had already lied about the tax bill, claiming it would be deficit neutral and wouldn't raise taxes on anybody. He correctly noted that pay-go had been triggered many times in the past but never actually implemented. We were descending into seriously esoteric debates, and I could sense that I was missing an opportunity to land an emotional gut punch. So I pivoted to a new topic. Why not use this tax vote as an opportunity to demand a solution for dreamers? I asked him. He explained that he was working hard on finding a fix and was confident there would be one by March. I told him that it was a mistake to give up his leverage now in exchange for promises of future action. He was unwilling to take a hard negotiating stance, he said. He thanked me for the conversation and tried to end it. I wouldn't let him. I asked him about the children's health insurance program. I asked him if he was happy with the process by which the tax bill had been written. No, none of us are happy with the process. It's a lack of regular order that's been going on for years now. It's been pretty dysfunctional, the whole Senate, he replied. I had finally broken through, found an argument that resonated with him. I decided to press my case. So why not take your stand now? I pleaded, my voice becoming more intense. He smiled with embarrassment, leaning back, unable to respond. I pushed. You can be an American hero, you really can. If the votes match the speech. Think about the legacy that you will have for my son, and your grandchildren, if you take your principles and turn them into votes. You can save my life. I've thought about that sentence some, since of course even by voting no on the tax scam he could not actually keep me alive. But if he did vote no, saving many other lives, he would be giving my life the kind of purpose we are all seeking. Well, thank you, he said, reaching to shake my hand and make his escape. I wasn't quite finished. Please remember this conversation, I pleaded, moving my emotional appeal into 6th gear. He tried a bit of flattering himself, saying you're very read up on everything, aren't you? I decided not to reveal that I was a lawyer and a professional activist, opting instead for some hyperbole. My life depends on it. I moved to my closing argument. I need you to make your votes match your principles, Senator, and for the rest of your life, you will be proud if you vote this bill down. You will be proud. And on your deathbed, I promise you, my voice cracked with emotion at the thought of my own not too distant deathbed, you will remember voting no. This is your moment to be an American hero. Please, we will all be watching you. Please. Thank you. I shook his hand again and let him go. He turned around and walked to his seat. I turned to Liz, who stopped recording. That was incredible, she said. I asked her if she had captured it all. She was optimistic, but we immediately plugged her buds into our ears, rewound the tape, and watched the exchange from the beginning. I was relieved that everything was fully audible. Liz knew that she had social media gold on her hands. She tried to upload it to Twitter, but the Coco in-flight didn't cooperate. So we alerted her 2,000 followers and my 200 that we had just had a very good conversation, and the video would be forthcoming after we landed. We spent the rest of the flight getting to know one another, gossiping about Democratic politics, and deciding that we should start a super PAC together to elect progressive people to local office. I had planned to spend the fall resting, completing my memoir, and using my modest social media platform to encourage progressives to hashtag be a hero and volunteer as much as possible in the final weeks before the midterm elections. But Washington, D.C. had other ideas. The Senate Judiciary Committee scheduled its hearings to consider the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court for the first week in September. His confirmation would represent a grave threat to the American people, whereas outgoing Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy believed that the Constitution guaranteed the right to contraception, abortion, and gay marriage. Kavanaugh believed that Congress and the states could outlaw these things. And, at only 53, he would likely cement a radical right-wing majority for 30 years or more. This was a particularly bitter pill to swallow, because a Hillary Clinton victory in the 2016 election would have delivered the Supreme Court to progressives for the first time in 50 years. We had come so close, and now the future looked so dim. Unwilling to quietly accept such a monumental loss, my comrades sprang into action. The ferocity of their opposition changed the whole tenor of the Kavanaugh debate, which had previously been rather milquetoast, creating new space for Senators Kamala Harris and Cory Booker to grill the nominee on his dishonesty and radical ideology. The well-branded protests paired perfectly with our anti-Susan Collins fundraiser, which started performing spectacularly, blowing past my expectations and raising over $1 million in about a week. We had certainly gotten her attention, but I was discouraged by her response. Rather than acknowledging the deeply held feelings on both sides of the debate and promising to do what was best for her constituents, which would have left her room to vote yes or no in a couple weeks, Collins began showing her true colors, describing our crowdfunding campaign as bribery. The radical right was clearly concerned that our effort would sway her. Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, and Senator Ted Cruz made nearly identical statements. It seemed as though our tactical prowess would be insufficient and we were going to fall 1 or 2 votes short. And then something happened. Christine Blasey Ford, a high school acquaintance of Kavanaugh's, published an op-ed alleging that he had tried to rape her at a summer evening party when they were in school. She had told her husband and therapist about the attack years earlier, lending credence to her allegation. Washington was thrown into a tizzy. After some initial jockeying, the Senate Judiciary Committee scheduled an additional day of hearings on September 27 to hear directly from Blasey Ford and Kavanaugh, who immediately denied any wrongdoing. We mobilized our troops again, and this time a much broader swath of the progressive movement got in on the action. There were now 3 powerful new reasons to fight hard. First, it had become clear that Kavanaugh was an odious human being. It would be a disgrace to see him with lifetime tenure on the nation's highest court. Second, Confirming Kavanaugh in the face of Ford's damning allegation would send a terrible message to millions of victims of sexual violence. There is no point in coming forward because the people in power won't believe you, or won't care that you've been assaulted, and your credibility, privacy, and safety may all come under attack. That is to say, confirming Kavanaugh would undermine all the good work that the #MeToo movement had done over the past year to encourage victims to speak up and institutions to punish perpetrators. Third, there might now even be a plausible path to saving the Supreme Court seat. If the White House were forced to withdraw Kavanaugh's nomination, there would be no time to confirm a different nominee before the midterm elections. If Democrats then managed to capture the majority, all bets would be off. Nay, I on a stage, and I got on a plane to Baltimore on Sunday the 23rd and checked into a suburban Holiday Inn. Early the next morning we rolled into the bright atrium of the Hart Senate office building, which was beginning its transformation into a massive progressive movement reunion hall. Tracy and Julia and the rest of the summer crew were there, handing out Black Be a Hero t-shirts to everyone inside. Leaders from the Women's March were handing out signs saying "Believe Women" and "Cancel Kavanaugh," and pins saying "I believe Christine" and "I still believe Anita Hill." There were boxes of coffee, trays of bagels and cream cheese, sign-up sheets, press releases, hugs, and selfies. I was swarmed by old friends, new well-wishers, and a few supporters and videographers. I ought to put my amplifier on, but in the din and with my increasingly enfeebled tongue, there was almost no way that anybody could understand me. Ayana stood by my side, translating. I smiled more than I spoke and tried to use my words efficiently. I had learned how to do my work without functional legs or hands, but I wasn't yet sure how to lead a protest movement without my voice. Our field marshal commanded us up to Susan Collins's office, where hundreds of protesters, dozens of police, and a handful of TV cameras filled the hallway. Survivors of sexual violence began to tell their painful stories, begging Collins's staff members to see their humanity and convince their boss to vote no. Eventually, Jen Flynn gave the signal, "If the senator isn't willing to meet with us, then I think we're gonna have to shut this office down." She said it calmly and confidently and then walked away, like a mafioso ordering a hit. Her wish was our command, and dozens of women, and a handful of men, sat down on the floor and bellowed out my chant with more passion than ever before. "Kavanaugh's disgusting, and that's why we're disrupting." Suddenly, Anna Maria spoke up. She, too, had been assaulted as a young girl, and nobody believed her. Although Anna and I had been close friends and colleagues for 8 years, this was news to me. And it was also, she told me shortly afterward, news to her parents. This was not the way she wanted them to find out, but duty called. Office after office, hallway after hallway, interview upon Facebook post and Twitter thread, at dining room tables and break room water coolers, in cities and suburbs and small towns all around America, survivors of sexual violence were drawing inspiration and courage from Christine Blasey Ford and one another, telling a national story in millions of tragic acts. We ended the day, like we had ended so many previous days of resistance, in the Russell Senate office building rotunda. We handed out copies of an open letter that I had authored and circulated, pledging solidarity and support for the women who were leading this movement. Sean read it aloud as cameras flashed and streamed. I nodded my head rhythmically to the chants and songs but did not even try to add my voice. The police took everyone away one by one until I was the last protester in the middle of the vast marble floor. I looked up to curved roof of the rotunda and saw the late afternoon light streaming in through the windows. We do what we can, while we can. That was the motto that my father and I settled upon in the months after my diagnosis with ALS. And right then, that was what I could do, put my body there, in a shared struggle for shared liberation. On Wednesday we were at it again, focused this time exclusively on the offices of female Republican senators. At each stop, women poured their hearts out, and dozens more were brought to tears. Jennifer Epps Addison told her story. Ayanna Sage told hers. Alyssa Milano told hers. You could taste the righteous indignation, smell the despair, hear all around you the powerful sounds of sisterhood. Could these senators really vote to confirm this man after seeing the outpouring of opposition from millions of women? It was too horrific to fathom. Both Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh were scheduled to testify that Thursday. When we arrived, there were well over 1,000 activists milling about the Hart Senate office building. The atmosphere was one part carnival, one part protest, one part progressive movement reunion, and one part wing. We still didn't know where we would find the votes to defeat this odious nominee. We had decided not to engage in any civil disobedience that day, in order to keep the focus on the two witnesses' testimony. As the 10 a.m. hearing start time approached, we all split up and went to find senators' offices from which to watch. My friends and I thought it would be fun to go occupy Ted Cruz's waiting room, and so, with a Politico reporter in tow, Ben Wickler and Helen and Tracy and Julia and Nate and Ayana and I all plopped ourselves down in the office of the most disliked man on Capitol Hill. His office receptionists were surprised but cordial and, with Texas hospitality, turned the two televisions on just as Christine Blasey Ford began her testimony and offered us snacks and drinks. Within a couple hours it seemed to us that the Kavanaugh nomination was doomed. Ford came across as a reasonable, sympathetic, credible individual, and her story was entirely believable. Indeed, she explained that she had tried to alert the White House to Kavanaugh's crime even before he was nominated, precisely so that the president would pick someone else. The prosecutor whom the Republicans had deputized to ask their questions did nothing to undermine Ford's credibility. What was the most vivid memory she had of the attack? One Democratic senator asked. Indelible in the hippocampus is the laughter, Blasey Ford replied, in a line that would itself become indelible. The uproarious laughter between the two. They're having fun at my expense. By the time her testimony was over, in the early afternoon, the reviews were unanimous. Even Fox News agreed that Ford was a stellar witness and that Kavanaugh's nomination was in trouble. We were in high spirits, so we decamped to watch Kavanaugh's testimony from Kamala Harris's office, eager to witness the former prosecutor make mincemeat out of the nominee. And then something unexpected happened. Kavanaugh began his testimony doing his best impression of Al Pacino in Scarface, guns blazing furiously, self-righteous indignation erupting out of every pore. The Republican senators, reclaiming their time from the inadequately partisan prosecutor, followed Kavanaugh's lead, decrying the witch hunt that they claimed was besmirching a good man's reputation. Never before had the chasm between them and us seemed so wide to me. Never before had their immoral mendacity seemed so vivid. After 4 days of arrests and speeches and chanting and scheming, I was spent from putting a good face on a shitty situation, tired of inspiring others to hope when I had so little of it myself. And yet these past days had also been so filled with courage and sisterhood and solidarity. The ugliness of Donald Trump and Brett Kavanaugh had birthed so much beauty and love and power. My impending death, over this epic year and this tumultuous week, had brought me so much closer to so many people, had brought me so much respect and power, so much perspective and wisdom. I had been emptied and rejuvenated at the very same time, paralyzed and empowered by the very same disease. These interwoven dichotomies, this beauty out of horror and tragedy embedded in triumph, this was the lived meaning of the word poignancy. Through my labored speech, I told him about being mortal, medicine and what matters in the end, Atul Gawande's meditation on dying. The book had moved me for many reasons, including his powerful insight that poignancy is the simultaneous experiencing of beauty and tragedy, joy and sadness. When I watch Carl and Rachel tickle each other silly but cannot join in the fun, when I hear him ask her to teach him the alphabet night after night after night, when I see how much he enjoys goofing off with my male friends, and yearn to replace them just once, when I witness his charisma, at this early age, and know that it will blossom into a rare magnetism in the decades to come, and that I will not be here to cherish it at his poignancy. The purpose of life is not the maximization of happiness and the minimization of pain, Atul and Paul Colony conclude. Because the most meaningful moments, the most beautiful ones, the most important ones, the ones that shape our character and our worldview, the ones that we remember as our lives come to a close, these are sometimes moments of pure happiness, but are, more often perhaps, moments of poignancy. That night, back at the Capitol Skyline Hotel, Nate and I had a decision to make. Should we wake up early and head to the airport for our return flight to California, or should we remain in the trenches as the Senate Judiciary Committee and then the full Senate voted on Kavanaugh's nomination? We were so tired. We had done so much. There were many others doing the work. We decided to return home, and to continue rallying the troops via social media. We turned off the lights. I listened to a few tracks from Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline, and then I handed my phone to Nate to plug in. Ben Whitler is texting you, Nate said. He says that word on Capitol Hill is that the vote is a total toss-up, but that Murkowski, Flake, Collins, Indiana Senator Joe Donnelly, and West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin are all going to vote as a bloc, and that they're probably all going to follow Collins's lead. Nate and I digested the intel. Whitler had said we still had a chance to win and that Collins was the deciding vote. Over the past week, our fundraiser for her opponent, which would only trigger should she choose to vote for Kavanaugh, had reached nearly $2 million. Many articles had been written about our fund, and I was prominent in stories about her vote. Seems hard to leave if she's the key vote, Nate said. She's kinda your defensive assignment. Yeah, I said. Then extended the sports metaphor further. Going home now would kind of be like walking off the court with 2 minutes left to play. We pushed through our exhaustion, draw strength from the sisterhood that was leading the fight. In the morning we headed back to the Hart building. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing was scheduled for 9:30. Jen Flynn had already dispatched the troops to ride up and down the elevators. Okay, but what are we doing in them? Asked Anna Marie. Bird dogging, said Jen, particularly the committee's Republicans as they headed for the hearing room. Anna Maria knew how to do that. She was partnered randomly with a young, first-time protester named Maria Gallagher. After riding with no luck for a while, Anna decided she should be a good role model for Maria, so instead of going to check email, she suggested they go wait outside Senator Flake's office. About 5 minutes before the hearing was set to begin, as they were standing there in the hallway, along with a handful of reporters and videographers, just then they got a devastating alert on their phones. Flake had announced that he would vote in favor of the nomination, giving Kavanaugh just enough support to make it to the Senate floor. Only moments later, as if it had been scripted in Hollywood, they saw Senator Flake exit through a side door and walk briskly in the other direction toward the elevators. Anna Maria, and a co-worker named Daniel immediately sprinted after the senator, reporters in tow, catching up to him just as he and his staffer entered the elevator. Daniel, approximately 6'6", already had his phone in hand and hit record immediately, capturing the whole scene clearly. Maria had the brilliant instinct to block the shiny golden door with her foot as it began to close. And Anna Maria, filled with adrenaline from the sprint, filled with 2 decades of experience using human stories to speak truth to power, filled with fury at the prospect that Kavanaugh might soon have jurisdiction over her queer immigrant radical family and the full breadth of this nation, filled with the pain of her own sexual assault and the pressure it had built up inside her for 30 years, filled with the unspeakable anguish that she had witnessed dozens of women nevertheless vocalize. In recent days, filled with the knowledge that this kind of kismet was too precious to waste, filled with righteous anger that the man in front of her would dare perpetrate such an offense against the people of this country, and perhaps holding in her breast just the tiniest kernel of hope that she might still be able to shame him into behaving decently for once, Anna Maria bellowed out at Jeff Flake. On Monday, I stood in front of your office with Ady Barkan. I told the story of my sexual assault. I told it because I recognized in Dr. Ford's story that she is telling the truth. What you are doing is allowing someone who actually violated a woman to sit on the Supreme Court. This is not tolerable. You have children in your family. Think about them. I have 2 children and cannot imagine that for the next 50 years they will have to have someone in the Supreme Court who has been accused of violating a young girl. What are you doing, sir? Flake said nothing, and by now Maria had taken a crash course in bird dogging. So she spoke up. I was sexually assaulted and nobody believed me. I didn't tell anyone, and you're telling all women that they don't matter, that they should just stay quiet, because if they tell you what happened to them you are going to ignore them. She repeated her argument. He looked down at the floor. Look at me when I'm talking to you, she commanded, brilliantly inverting their power dynamic. She repeated her message a 3rd time, fury pouring out louder each time. Flake was too ashamed to do anything but look at the floor again. Don't look away from me. For 5.5 grueling minutes this went on, with Flake trapped in the elevator, refusing to engage. CNN aired the confrontation live, and all the news channels showed it on endless repeat through the day because of the unbelievable events that unfolded next. After Flake finally extracted himself from the elevator, he went to the committee room and sat, stone-faced, as the chairman began the proceedings. A short while later Flake stood up, walked over to tap Democratic Senator Chris Coons on the shoulder, and retreated with him to the privacy of a closed-door meeting room. Downstairs in the Hart Building atrium, activists were enthusiastically sharing the video of the elevator confrontation. After a while Anna appeared, to an enthusiastic reception. She and I embraced and marveled together at the good fortune that would make Jeff Flake an even more captive audience of hers than he had been of mine on that plane 9 long months before. And maybe you'll actually change his mind, I said hopefully. Suddenly I realized she hadn't yet heard the news. The hearing was on hold while Jeff Flake conferred privately with a handful of Democrats. By evening Flake had announced that he would demand a 1-week investigation into the allegations against Kavanaugh. President Trump had ordered said investigation. Mitch McConnell had delayed the vote on his confirmation. Flake had acknowledged to CNN that Anna and Maria's pleas along with all the others from throughout the week had moved him to change his perspective. Anna was the lead guest on Anderson Cooper's primetime show, and the entire progressive movement was brimming with hope that our efforts might pay off. After leaving the studio, Anna and her towering videographer Daniel came over to our suite at the Capitol Skyline Hotel, where Nate, Tracy, Ayanna, and I rewarded their heroic efforts with Thai delivery. Nate and Ayanna took turns shoveling noodles and eggplant and rice into my mouth with flimsy plastic utensils as we reflected upon the day's amazing developments. It was, I told Anna, the single most impressive and important piece of activism I had ever witnessed. She had flipped his vote with her fury. Anna insisted that she was only one blade of straw sitting atop an enormous pile built by millions of women, with Christine Blasey Ford and Anita Hill at the very foundation. She had an early morning appearance on network television, so we ended the festivities before midnight and said goodbye. Within days it became clear that the Trump White House was severely limiting the scope and depth of the FBI investigation and, even more consequentially, that Senators Flake and Collins were interested only in the appearance of open-mindedness, not the thing itself. On the day that Susan Collins delivered a speech filled with partisan talking points to justify her vote in favor of the nominee, thousands of enraged people donated to our fund for her future opponent, raising over $1 million. It was the most depressing grand slam I ever hit. Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed, and I fear he will still be doing damage to America and its people when Carl is my age. In the final weeks before the midterm elections, I watched as my co-workers from the Center for Popular Democracy volunteered on campaigns around the country and coordinated with various Democratic political action committees to use my story and our footage in their closing arguments to voters. We partnered on major media buys in 4 swing House races, winning them all, and other groups ran online ads with the Be a Hero message in 100 districts. I published a magazine article and tweets urging progressives to volunteer as much as possible, but my work on the midterms was largely complete. I just had to wait for the results. In the early afternoon the day before Halloween, Ayanna and I sat in the sunny dining room and shared lunch with Ching, a Santa Barbara friend who we had met through Carl. We got to talking about our plans for the holiday, and Ayana said she would be doing a personal ritual at home. That piqued my interest and led to the revelation that she self-identifies as a witch. Ayana explained that witchcraft and the casting of spells was about getting in touch with her desires and wishes for herself, for others, for the world. It was a way of working intentionally at the intersection of the personal and the divine for a higher purpose, of identifying and vocalizing gratitude, sadness, fear, hope. It was prayer, not so different from the prayer that Nate had shared with me in the RV on that quiet night. Not so different from the type of self-aware mindfulness that had gotten me through those early months. What about you, Ady? Ching asked. Where do you find your spirituality and your deeper truths? I thought for a while, and then started to cry. The election was a week away. Democracy, I realized. That was where I found my first principles. The notion that we should order our world based on decisions that we make together, that our fate as individuals is tied inexorably to the fate of others, that political struggle is timeless, essential, and liberating. This, I realized, was my religious conviction. This was my secular faith. As I struggled to convey my answer to Ayana and Ching intelligibly, I realized how much of my life and how many of my choices this answer explained. More than anything else, I had spent my career in pursuit of a more just and equitable democracy, because, I understood now, it was what I believed in most deeply. Thank you.
All right, so the plan is for us to gather 3 questions now from the audience, which then Ady will answer, and while he's preparing the answers, we will present 2 questions that were already posed with answers. So, questions, raise your hands, we're going to note them. Don't be shy. All right, then I am going to present one of the questions maybe, and then we can play the first answer and give you a chance to reflect further. So the first question from a colleague reads as follows. Ady, something you mentioned in the book, and something which will no doubt intensify, is that the more your health deteriorates, so the more your fame grows, and therefore the strength of your voice. What is that like, and how have you navigated that fame while still finding time for your family and the very personal nature of this journey?
That's the paradox of my situation. As my voice has gotten weaker, more people have heard my message. As I've lost the ability to walk, more people have followed in my footsteps. I had to find a good work-life balance just like other parents. I've got a hard situation, but so do many other people. So I try to make the wise call, in a way that will bring me happiness now, and pride and peace tomorrow. It's not easy. It's an ongoing challenge. One day at a time, right? One moment, right here in front of us. And the next moment in its time, when it comes, bringing with it what it may.
Thank you. Anybody feeling a question now?
Hi, Ady. It's Mona.
We're going to write this down.
Okay. I'm wondering what it feels like to be a national, probably international celebrity at a moment when you are coping with ALS and the way it's transforming your life, and also finding your most powerful voice as an activist. What's it feel like to be so visible?
Okay. Shall I go ahead and read? I'll read the next question that we've already posed to you, which is the following. And then I'll ask you for guidance. All right, so you write that shortly after your move to Santa Barbara in the summer of 2014, you were caught up in a contradiction. On the one hand, you were reading Buddha's philosophy and practicing mindfulness meditation in an effort to accept the tragedy of your ALS. But on the other hand, you knew that your career, your work, and your entire self-identity were built around what Kabat-Zinn described as the mode of doing, of molding the world to our wishes. Activism and politics, you noted, were precisely about not accepting the tragedies of the world, about insisting that we could reduce pain and prolong life. So the question is, could you discuss how you manage or reconcile or maintain or accommodate this contradiction?
I have come to understand the difference this way. I can do nothing to change the fact of my terminal illness. There is no cure for ALS right now, and there is nothing I can do to stop my rapid neurological decay. To flail against it helplessly would only cause me additional grief and suffering, so the only thing I can do is accept it. That isn't true about the healthcare crisis in this country, or systemic racism, or the climate emergency barreling towards our shorelines every day. Resisting those challenges, whether by marching, or voting, or petitioning, that's the only way to solve the most pressing problems facing our society. And that is why I'm doing everything I can, even as paralysis grips more of my body every day. Struggling for justice is a fruitful endeavor. It even makes my ALS more tolerable.
So I just want to respond for a minute and say that what I'm hearing is that your deep investment of the self really goes in two directions. That your self is individual and it is so embedded in collective experience that you forge ahead this way. So that's what I take from your response. Any other questions to collect? Yes. Okay, 1, 2.
Hi, Ady. My name is Joanne Nowak. I have 2 little children, and yours is the first
Your
book.
question is a good one moment.
Oh, yeah, this is true. Yours is the first book that I've read from front to cover in a long time, so I really appreciate how beautifully you wrote it, and thank you for pulling me out of timeouts and dinner and just to think about bigger questions. I work on campus here at the Blum Center, and we work with students to get them engaged in issues of poverty and inequality and thinking about democracy. Given that you read your excerpt how you had a sort of big moment of awakening at Columbia's activism and the potential for activism, would you have any suggestions for students here for how they can be sort of encountering these moments where they can awaken their sort of activist spirit or activist future?
So we're writing that down. We'll pass it to you. Let's collect one more. Yes.
Hi, my name is Tommy Bladney. I'm a student here at UCSB and political junkie and also big, I don't know if that's the right word, but a big admirer of yours. So first I just want to thank you for everything that you do and that you've done. My question is, you talked a few minutes ago about feeling like democracy was your spirituality, was your secular religion. When do you think if you were to try to pick a moment where you think that became your religion, when was that the end? When you were at Columbia, or when?
Thank you. So, Ady, do you have the first question, or can we pass it along? Where are we? Okay, we're looking on the first question, so we can. Anyone have any comments or thoughts you want to share? Responses, reactions? And while we do, I want to say the books are here, waiting for you to buy. So.
You spoke about in life it's not just about ignoring the bad stuff, but rather it moving forward. And I appreciate you touching on that, since so many people, they see crime, they see you suffering, and it's so easy for them to just chew you up, as if, I think I've heard this before, as if anger didn't drive a person, as if death didn't make them want to act. So I appreciate you touching on that, since I think it's so growing out to just impose happiness and impose always wanting to be in love and cheerful, instead of how much it can help to be in the situation that you are. But thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or thoughts you want to share? Other Constance?
I would just, hi, this is Constance, and I just want to comment on the answer that you gave last time you spoke here at UCSB in the Pollock Theater, and in that, should I?
If we can hear me.
Okay. So that, and my question was about, there's an argument, a good argument, that all of the huge issues that we're dealing with, such as Medicare for all, could be encompassed under the rubric of fighting against climate change and for sustaining the planet. And so I just wanted to get your take on, how, what would be the wisdom of putting all these other issues underneath the broad rubric of fighting against climate change. And your answer was so brilliant. And so I wanted a little more, perhaps, but at least I'd like to just say how much I appreciated the answer, which was that, yes, we could see the issue of Medicare for all under that larger rubric, but at the same time, the people who are doing the work on climate change and the Green New Deal and all of that, they could learn a lot from how personal we had made all the medical issues to people. And that's why Medicare for All was succeeding, and really taking on. And if only the climate change folks could figure out ways to do that too, to make it so personal to everyone.
That's really interesting. Thank you. All right. Any other thoughts you want to share, responses, before we start to have some answers to the questions?
So I wanted to share something that I learned from Ady very early on when we got to know each other. And he compelled judging my husband and I with our young daughter to book a last-minute ticket to DC to fly out and to join him in the halls of our government, and it was one of them. It was like a revelation, a transformative experience for myself. But something that he kept on saying over and over again is, show up because it's fun. Show up because you want to be with other people. You want to feel the good feelings of being in community. You want to be together. Show up because it feels good. Don't just show up because you're angry. Don't just show up because you feel like you have to do something. Let it fill you up. Let it fill your cup. Let it energize you, and let that carry you forward. And I think it's something that has changed me. It's changed my whole outlook on the question of activism. And I wanted to share that from early on in our friendship.
I think that really
Your question is a good one moment.
Yeah.
My life is surreal. I definitely did not expect it to turn out this way. But in some ways, I think that is a common experience.
All right. So
Jody, I think that the key to getting involved is saying yes. There is no wrong way to be an activist, no wrong way to try to tackle these challenges. This is college, and you're supposed to be experimenting.
Well, as you do, I just want to say that for those of you who haven't yet read the book, my experience of reading was that kind of enthusiasm and pleasure in the work that you're doing really comes through on every page. And I can't believe that I'm actually making this happen, not in a sort of, that it's implausible, but that there's a kind of freshness every time there's a victory or there's progress. And I think that's what makes the reading so engaging, that we're sort of taken along on this journey, both of the developments and the engagement and the activism, and the person who's both impelling the work, but along for the ride as well, and witnessing it and enjoying it and sort of unabashedly celebrating that. So I think that's one of the great, as I've said, one of the great discoveries of reading the book in terms of, it's not real only that drives Ady through, so it seems, but it's true pleasure in that, in the exchanges. So yeah, you will see when you read the book. Any other comments, thoughts, reflections of reading? So here, yeah.
I'm just wondering how Buddha spoke about activism. He talks about Buddhism.
It's another question.
Oh, sorry. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, well, I'm not one to speak, but can anybody speak to that? Any Buddhist scholars here in the room? Okay, well, we'll put that on the list. As I understand from the passage of the book, the Buddhism was about utter acceptance of the given and the reality. Again, we'll see where Ady wants to go with that. That's what I recall. Yeah, in the back, comment. Aaron, we have
I have a question.
another question. Okay.
Is that okay?
Well, we'll see. Try to answer it as you ask it as well. What's your takeaway in hearing these fabulous passages read? Are there any clues to the answer in the work itself?
Ady, my name is Adam Turner. Thank you for coming and being here. Very inspiration to many of us, or all of us, I'm sure. I wanted to ask, you said that your father said after your diagnosis that your mantra or credo was, we do what we can while we can. Is that the one thing you would want people to take away from you, if they could only take away one thing? So that's kind of my...
And sort of you're saying the thing I've really taken away at this moment is the freedom to do what you can while you can, which I think is a very powerful message that comes through in the story. If it's the one thing, well, we'll have to ask about that. But personally, I think there are many takeaways. But as you will see when you read the book.
Well, one of the things just listening is just a powerful and important reminder that this movement that is about democracy and reclaiming democracy that you speak so beautifully about didn't start with the resistance to Trump. And it didn't start when you were protesting in Columbia either, but the really important work I'm struck by, the important work you were doing at Columbia, the Occupy movement, these are all deep, deep unresolved issues that help us to understand why we are where we are today. And to me, the power in remembering that is that there has been a sort of democracy movement building over these many, many, many years that kind of needs to embrace the affirmative in very much in the ways that you've been embracing and go out and win and go out and change rather than getting stuck in the resistance part of this. So thank you. And thank you for putting it so incredibly eloquently and in a way that I think will move people, hopefully to action.
Right.
As for the moment I realized that I was a political person, there was no one moment. It's been a process of growth. But I recently went back to my high school and realized how lucky I was to have teachers who taught me to care about others and care about the world around me. That is what it means to be political.
conversation, the magic doors open, and there's some sustenance for everybody. So please, stay in later.